"Zeke," said the gentleman cowboy, sitting on the front porch of the Black Dog Saloon, "I'm powerful worried about your daughter." He was looking across the street at a young woman dressed in denim jeans and a brown buckskin vest. Her boots looked like she had worn them for years. Her hat was an old brown Stetson, under which a loose blonde ponytail fell between her shoulder blades. She was saddling a massive strawberry roan mare, like any man could be found doing. The horse had just been shod in the adjoining livery stable, and was now ready to travel. Zeke looked up from the chessboard between them, and fixed a steady gaze on his old friend. "It's your move," grunted Zeke, "and you're losing. You ought to be more concerned about the board and less concerned with her backside." The woman was bending over now to tighten the underbelly cinch of the saddle. Her bottom filled out her jeans quite nicely, and though her manner of dress would be quite common for women in 100 years, today it was making Jake Daggert most uncomfortable. "Well," sighed Jake, "she's quite the distraction, Zeke. I don't ever recall a pair of men's work pants having such a profound effect on me before." Zeke laughed. "You ought to get out more," he said. He watched Jake push one of his white pawns up to the Queen Bishop foursquare, and then leave it there. Jake sat back again and resumed his gaze towards the woman across the street. "Well now," said Jake, "I's just thinking, Zeke. She spends a awful lot of time out there by herself on the open prairie, doing God knows what. Suppose she'd meet up with one of them outlaws." Zeke smiled at this. The irony of that was not lost on him. "Oh, I mean like that Sundown feller," said Jake seriously. "He's been seen out this way recently. People like Sundown. He ain't like me and you was, Zeke. We was gentlemen outlaws. Lord only knows what drives that feller. Ain't you worried none about her?" "Sundown," mused Zeke, as he plotted his next move. "Do we know him?" "Humph," grunted Jake. "Course not. He robs trains. He ain't even in our league." Zeke picked up his black knight and took one of Jake's white bishops. Jake's mind was clearly not on the game today. Both men were drinking wild turkey and smoking imported Cuban cigars. They routinely played chess out here, on the front porch of the Black Dog, nearly every afternoon. Neither man had touched a hand of poker in the last 15 years. Poker led to other vices, like robbing banks. Neither man had robbed a bank in more than 15 years, either. To look at these two men sitting here now, quietly absorbed in their game of chess, it was impossible to tell that, at one time, these two men had been part of the Silent Shadows Gang, the most successful bank-robbing outfit in the history of the American West. That had been 15 years ago. Now their criminal history was a thing of the past. Only Zeke Jacobs and Jake Daggert were still around to talk about it. Both of them had sworn never to even mention the Silent Shadows ever again. So long as they could keep their mouths shut, the gang would remain forever unknown and uncaptured. All of the other members were long dead and buried. They were now gentlemen cattle barons, and had a handsome income from laundering their ill-gotten gains in the livestock market. Being men of leisure, they had decided to ensure each other's silence by taking up chess, and spending untold hours staring at the 64 squares in contemplative silence, rather like Trappist monks on an inner journey for enlightenment. It was safe and kept them off the streets. The woman was now walking towards them, leading the great horse. She smiled up at them sweetly. "Paul," she said, nodding to Zeke. "Mr. Daggett. Afternoon." Jake sat up and assumed a proper position in the presence of a lady. "Ma'am," he said, clearing his throat. "I'm fixin' to head out to the canyon for a few days, Pa," said Sunshine Jacobs. "I'll probably be gone a couple of weeks. Want to get down to River's End and see Uncle Jack and Grandma Mary. It's been a while." "Be careful," said Zeke, not looking up from his game. Jake sat back and shook his head, tisking to himself. "Is there a problem, Mr. Daggett?" asked Sunshine, upon seeing his consternation. "Pretty thing like you," he said, still shaking his head, "out traipsing around the wilderness all by yourself. You ought to be in a dress, finding some rich man to take care of you." Sunshine laughed. "I got a rich man to take care of me, Mr. Daggett. My daddy." She winked up at Zeke, who couldn't help but grin. He loved his little girl, no matter how big she got. "But having to saddle your own horse, Sunshine, you need a man for that," Jake insisted. She knew exactly which man he had in mind for her as well. Jake had been after her since she had been 14 years old, and he had spied her sunbathing down by the river in the Altogether. He had had a thing for her ever since. "I got 2 hands, Mr. Daggett," said Sunshine. "I'll take care of it myself." "But," he pushed, "what about intimacy, Sunshine? Physical comfort? The natural union of God's creatures?" Sunshine smiled her most impish smile up at him. She mounted her horse and turned its head away. As she was turning to go, she answered him. "Oh, you mean sex, Mr. Daggett? Like I said, I got 2 hands. I'll take care of it myself." She rode off without another word to either of them. Jake sat back, fuming to himself, while Zeke chuckled noiselessly in his throat. "Impudent little cuss," said Jake. "I swear, you ought to take a strap to her, Zeke." Zeke smiled up at his friend. "Tried that," he said, "when she was 14. Caught her running around naked down by the river. Oh, I believed her when she said she didn't know anybody was watching her, but I said I was going to whip her anyway. She done got too big to run around raw like that. I took her behind some trees, and I got my riding crop off my horse. I bent her over an old fence rail, and I whipped her butt 39 times, just like in the Bible, 39 stripes. I marked her pretty good." He paused here for effect. "What happened?" Jake wanted to know. "When I was through, she stood up, turned around, and smiled at me." "What?" Jake asked. "No tears, no nothing," said Zeke, as he took a pull off his wild turkey, and then sat back down to light another cigar. He got a very far-away look in his eyes. "You had to know her mother," said Zeke. "God rest her. Prettiest woman in the territory. Skin soft as a baby's butt." He looked hard at Jake and said, "And every inch of it thick as dirt." Jake stared at him. Zeke looked out and watched his daughter disappear in the distance. From the edge of town, "I'd sooner cut a Comanche," he said softly. "At least they bleed." Jake didn't say anything. Suddenly he was glad that she would be gone for a couple of weeks. Maybe he could actually win a game of chess against her father here. After all, Jake was the better player, when he put his mind to it. He'd certainly have better odds playing with Zeke than messing with Sunshine Jacobs. Sunshine rode out of town, feeling her namesake beating down upon her from the heavens above. A warm gladness came over her. She took a deep breath and sighed contentedly. She loved it out here. Out here there was no one calling her woman to her face. There was no one trying to get in her breeches. No one telling her to put on a dress instead. Sunshine smiled a golden smile and thought about Jake Daggett. How silly he was. How silly he became whenever she was near him. Here she was, dressed like an overgrown tomboy, and Jake Daggett has the hots for her. Maybe he secretly had a thing for cowboys anyway. Maybe it was an acquired taste he had developed in prison years ago. Perhaps. But she was way too strange for Jake Daggett, ex-outlaw though he was. It had something to do with being raised by outlaws. Yeah. She thought about outlaws for a moment. She knew all about her father and the Silent Shadows gang. There had been 5 of them altogether. The Silent Shadows had not been bank robbers per se, but burglars. The heist was their method of robbery. Sunshine recalled her father telling her all about their heists. They never got caught. Sunshine smiled, remembering now. Her daddy was so proud of the fact they'd never been caught. He and Jake had a sacred oath between them not to even talk about it. The Silent Shadows gang. That was the name the press had given them. They never did call themselves that, and they weren't about to start now. Even Sunshine wasn't allowed to say it. Sunshine had been used to hiding in some abandoned safe house between towns whenever her father and the gang went on a mission. She didn't hold that against him, though. He never failed to bring her something nice, nor kiss her good night when he did come back for her. As she rode along now, she thought about her father's stern warnings about being out here alone. He had told her to watch out for outlaws and other riding parties that she might meet up with out here. She was warned not to get involved with any of them. "That High Plains gang," Zeke had told her. "They ride through these parts a couple times a year. And old Richard the Cannibal, he now lives about 100 miles south of Black Hawk Junction. Sunshine, that's just a little too close for Daddy's comfort." She laughed. She would be more likely to get eaten by Jake Daggett than Richard the Cannibal. And there were always the many and various warnings about their own local demon, the Sundown Bandit. The bandit was the most elusive of them all. No one had any idea who he was, when he wasn't robbing his next train. Other outlaws had names and faces and came from somewhere. Sundown had no real name, no known face, and for all anyone knew, he always simply just appeared out of thin air. Wherever there were train rails, that was where you'd find the bandit. Because he hit more trains on the local line than any other, he was thought to be a local boy. But who could know that for sure? Sundown had been seen as far north as Canada and as far south as Guadalupe. Copycatters, most likely. Men who dressed up as a known bandit and performed crimes in his name just for the sheer thrill of it. Any good outlaw worth his reputation had wannabes following him. Sundown had wannabes as well. No one had ever been accused of being the Sundown Bandit. The bandit was very much like the Silent Shadows had been, named by the press and reputation only. As far as anyone knew, the Sundown Bandit had never so much as opened his mouth during a robbery. Most people who were robbed by him thought it almost an honor to be robbed by a well-known outlaw. The well-known outlaw that nobody knew. There was no other name like William Bonney had for Billy the Kid. No real name at all. Sundown was almost thought to be supernatural, a legendary myth. Almost everyone he robbed was wealthy. There was never an instance when he robbed anyone on a train that looked poor. He robbed powerful people as a rule, powerful and evil-looking men. Going down the aisle of the train, he pointed his gun only at select people, not everyone. He seemed to be the Robin Hood of the railroad. Sort of. Sundown had one thing going for him that no other outlaw could manage. Sundown could keep his mouth shut. The great and tragic failing of every other known outlaw in the history of crime. Thousands of crimes could have been brought to a successful conclusion had not the outlaw in question decided to brag about having committed the act. Sundown never spoke at all. "Sunshine," her father had told her, "many outlaw robbers like to have safe houses and hideouts, sort of like the places we kept you when you were little. Some even have stashes for their stuff, places where they leave their incriminating clothing when they are between crimes. They have their costumes hidden here and there like little children waiting for All Hallows Eve. Some even keep part of their ill-gotten gains in these stashes, and they only visit these stashes when they gonna break the law. Keeps them from getting caught with the trappings of their trade in polite society." Sunshine Jacobs knew about stashes. She knew about one such stash in particular. "That Sundown feller," Zeke had warned her. "He's close. Real close. It takes one to know one, and I can smell this feller, Sunshine. He's somewhere around here. Oh, I know he attacks trains all up and down the line, but the majority of his crimes are all within 100 miles of here. Here, that's way too close to my little baby girl. I worry most about you stumbling on to him." "Oh, Pa," Sunshine had told him. "Sundown, he ain't never killed nobody." "You don't know that," said her father. Sunshine shrugged. "Maybe he's cute," she teased. Her father had laughed at this. "Women," he complained. "She's... You'd put on a dress for an old grungy outlaw, but you won't do it for your own daddy." With this, she had reached over and kissed him on the forehead. "You are an old outlaw," she said. "But I love you anyway." The stash that she had found was now 100 yards ahead of her. As she neared it, she began the familiar tremble of excitement. She felt the fear looking all about her incessantly. Just ahead of her now was the stash of a real live outlaw. Oh, Lord, to get caught now. She came upon the spot and dismounted. In front of her was an old abandoned well, long since bone dry and dusty. She walked over to the well, leading her horse behind her. She tied the beast to a shrub and reached down to lift the old boards covering the shaft of the well. A great old rope disappeared down into the darkness, and this she untied from the crossbar inside the mouth of the well. Then she began to pull on the rope and lift the great box from the darkened depths far below her. She kept her eyes and ears peeled in all directions. The box came out of the darkness and perched now upon the edge of the dry well. As she opened the box, which was not locked, she peered down into it. As always, there were the items she sought, the things she knew were kept there. The black Stetson hat, the blue bandana, the manila riding coat, and the roughly $4,000 of stolen money belonging to none other than himself, the Sundown bandit. Besides these items, there was also a black leather gun belt, an enormous Colt .45 pistol, and probably 50 rounds of ammunition laced along the leather belt in rows. She must never get caught here, even though the thought of it drove her absolutely wild. As she squatted here beside the stash, she closed her eyes and fantasized. She could picture him coming up behind her, big, tall, blond, blue-eyed, handsome as the devil. She could envision his dirt-smudged face, one of his trademarks. Sundown Bandit always had a boyish, dirt-smudged face. She could feel his very presence here. She sniffed his bandana deeply. It smelled like a man. 62 miles out of Bad Rock Canyon, a steam train was making its slow, laborious way down the tracks, doing a full 18 miles an hour. Chatty Dawson sat miserably low in her seat. Twice now her hateful aunt had smacked her leg, commanding that she be still and stop squirming in her seat. Chatty put her fingers on her thigh and rubbed herself, wincing at the sting. It hurt. Her aunt had a knack, an absolute talent, for hitting the exact same place every time she slapped her. Chatty Dawson hated her aunt with a passion. She could not hate her aunt openly, any more than she could get out of these twice-yearly trips back east with her aunt. Back east to civilization. The old mining town of Bad Rock Canyon still managed to subsist on eager settlers like Chatty's parents had been. But there were no stores equipped to handle Chatty's changing sizes as she grew each year. In fact, there wasn't much of anything at all in a town like Bad Rock Canyon, except the utter richness of having moved out west with the other fools who considered the Louisiana Purchase to be some sort of big deal or other. There was only one thing worse than having to live out in Bad Rock Canyon, and that was riding on a train with her Aunt Grable. These visits to her aunt's home back east might not have been quite so bad had little Chatty been able to ride the train by herself. But no, Her aunt insisted that she be allowed to ride the train with the child both ways, so that she might ensure nothing happened to her, like anything was going to happen to her on a train. "We'll be home soon," said her aunt, observing Chatty's concern over her stinging thigh. "Be a lady for a few more hours. It certainly won't kill you." Chatty allowed the comment to pass unchallenged. The old bat was just about to get on Chatty's little nerves. Chatty deserved better treatment than this, and she knew it. Biting her lip in frustrated rage, she tried not to cry. Had her aunt been observant enough to realize that Chatty was now 14 years old and had started having her periods since the last time they had been together, she might not have been so hard on the girl. Chatty Dawson was menstruating at this very moment, and she was in a good deal of discomfort. Chatty realized that no matter how old she would ever get, nor how many children she might have, her Aunt Grable would always treat her like a child, simply because she had once known Chatty to be a child. Aunt Grable was one of those people who never forgives childhood. But Chatty was no longer a child, and no longer willing to accept these spank marks as Aunt Grable's way. Chatty Dawson had reached the age of rebellion, and within her it stirred like her monthly cycle. It would have been so nice to have been able to say to her aunt, "Hey, I'm having problems over here. Why don't you stop smacking me and help me deal with them?" But no. Her aunt was not the loving, understanding type, despite her affluent ways and gifts. She bought people with her money, and she figured that was enough to do for anyone. There was no extra niceness in her black soul, none at all. Poor Chatty Dawson was being bothered by the vibrations of the train. Normally, these vibrations didn't bother her at all. This was the first time that she had ever had to have her time while riding a train, however. Now her sore little bottom was very sensitive. She was having feelings down there. The train's movement was relentlessly touching her and making her miserable. Had she been able to shift her weight from one side to another every so often, she might possibly have been able to deal with her dilemma. But her aunt, sitting next to her, had commanded that she sit absolutely still and not move a muscle. That meant she had to keep herself in direct contact with the leather seat. As she sat perfectly still in this manner, she could feel her secret feelings building up inside of her against her will. She bit her lip hard. She just knew it was going to happen. She sat back slowly to avoid another wicked spank. She closed her eyes. She tried to get her mind off of herself. She remembered how all of these trips had begun originally. Aunt Grable had approached Chatty's mother with a proposition. Once little Chatty started to school, let her come to visit in the big city back east, and all of her school clothes will be free. In exchange, of course, for the 2-week visit. It was the ultimate bribe. Her mother had accepted, and had thus sold little Chatty's soul to the devil. Chatty had no real reason to refuse such a visit, but Chatty would soon discover why it was her Aunt Grable lived alone. Aunt Grable had no patience at all. Her mother couldn't understand why Chatty didn't want to be with Aunt Grable. After all, she would get out of Bad Rock Canyon for a while. And all of those nice clothes. What was not to like about that? But Chatty's mother did not have to live with her for 2 weeks. Chatty Dawson paid dearly for her school clothes. Chatty wanted to cry right now, because she knew that her mother would care for her very well if she was at home. Once her mother heard that little Chatty was having her period, she would order her straight to bed, to fill her with hot soup, to replace the minerals lost in her body. She would allow her to luxuriously lie there all day long. She would bring her books and kiss her often. In the afternoons she would allow Chatty a nice long nap, and it was during these naps that Chatty would have some of those hot little thinking sessions. In these fantasies she would dream about every boy she had ever known, and allow those hot little feelings in her to bounce around inside all they pleased. Having her time at home was almost fun. She felt like Queen Mensis of the Red River Valley, the way her mother waited on her hand and foot, seeing to her every little need. She could not have treated her better if she had been about to deliver her first child into the world. On this train, however, her period was unbearable. "This can't happen to me," she sniffed in rage. "If it does, I will cry so hard that they will stop this stupid train and let me off, right here." Her little lip trembled in rage. Chatty's father had agreed with Chatty's reasoning concerning the wickedness of Aunt Grable, though not to Chatty's face. Chatty had been in bed one evening when she had overheard her father and mother discussing Aunt Grable in the kitchen. She had strained her ears to hear, and had heard most of what they were talking about. "She ought to get her a man, Jenny," her father was saying, "and leave Chatty out here where she belongs." "She's good to Chatty, John," said her mother. "She buys her things, and she's willing to ride the train both ways, just to be with her." "I'm not altogether sure it's what our little Chatty wants," said her father, shaking his great head. Chatty could envision him shaking his head back and forth, though through her bedroom wall she could not see it. Her father gestured quite a bit when he spoke. "I feel like we make Chatty go each time, Jenny. I don't think she enjoys those trips so much. It seems to me that her aunt's got something of a mean streak." Something of a mean streak. You could say that, Chatty had thought. You could say that like you could say the Sundown bandit needed a good spanking. "Pshaw, John," her mother had intoned, "you just have a thing against your own half-sister, and it doesn't become you. I won't hear talk like that." Her mother was a blessed, sainted woman, but she could shut the truth up faster than a snake doctor with a bad run of tonic. Chatty had cringed to hear her mother shut her father up like that. If they could just discuss it, then maybe they could see the feasibility in, please God, never sending her back east again. Her aunt was a raging psycho. "Oh, all right," her father had surrendered. "Fine, we won't discuss it further, but I must say that there is too much in this world to tempt the celibate woman, Jenny Dawson. God meant for the loose cannon of woman to be tied to a man. There are far too many virgins sleeping with the devil every night, I can tell you that. If it is that a woman can't have her urges met, she goes mean. Hear me good, for that is what will happen to Demura Grable, if it hasn't happened to her already." Her mother had made some sort of pretentious reply, along the lines of saying how her father thought that everything in the world was so wrapped up in sex that she just couldn't stand to hear him go on so. And that had been the end of that. Chatty wanted very much to squirm right now, but she couldn't. Her aunt would slap her if she did. Chatty Dawson slowly crossed her legs and pushed down with her stomach muscles for the relief that would give her. She could not help herself now, and she knew it was only a matter of time before she shuddered uncontrollably, lost in the grip of Jove's thunderbolt. Her aunt would definitely know what was happening to her. Aunt Grable had another irritating trait about her for which Chatty could have cheerfully killed her for exercising against her. That trait was the old bat recalled everything ever said or done in the most astonishing detail. She could even make it sound much worse than it really was, and her mother would cling to every word of it like it was some sensationalist literature. She should have been a writer, or at least a storyteller, for all the fiction she could make up about Chatty. The woman lied like a convict. Once they got to the station, Aunt Grable always found a moment or two alone with her mother, and then they would speak in the absolute gravest of tones concerning the behavior of Chatty Dawson while in the custodial care of her aunt. It was never good. Chatty had always done something wrong during the trip for which her mother would take her aside and later punish her for. More than once she had even spanked Chatty for some offense that her aunt had charged her with having committed. Once her punishment had been for speaking to a strange boy on the streets of New York. She had said hello, and had broken some ancient moral code concerning the decency of women. This time her punishment would be for indecency on the long, boring train ride home. No doubt her aunt would say that Chatty had been trying to make it happen so that she could be just as wicked as she could be. No doubt her aunt would pretend to be shocked at the deplorable behavior of Chatty Dawson in public. No, this was not going to be good at all. If that happened, then it wouldn't matter if Chatty had been on her period or not. A young lady who has such complicated sensations would just have to learn to control them better, and a large, flat hairbrush was just the very thing to help remind a girl not to let her personal thoughts carry her off so in the presence of polite company. Women did not in any wise let it be known that they had feelings, and any such experience out of one's boudoir was sinful and sensual, and it would be the woman's own fault if it happened. Chatty would greatly shame her mother if her aunt told her about this accident. It would be as bad as if she had actually kissed the boy on the streets of New York. Worse than that, it would be the very absolute worst thing possible. Chatty's eyes were shining with tears. She shot a pained glance over at her aunt, and was stunned to see the old bird staring back at her with a hard, knowing expression. The look in her aunt's eyes was absolutely awful. She knew. She had to know. The look was the very same look that her mother would shame her with when Chatty was doing something that did not become her. There was a look in the old woman's eyes like a serpent waiting for an egg to drop off the edge of a high nest. There was actual hate in her aunt's steel-gray gaze. Chatty turned away from her aunt and closed her eyes to await the execution of sentence. She was about 3 good breaths away from shuddering violently, and there was no fake cough nor any pretend sneeze that would cover for her. Her climaxes were epileptic and left no room for doubt. She would have to gasp at least once as the pleasure ripped through her, and that would give it totally away. She felt like she was perched upon the awesome edge of Niagara Falls, and was at that great swelling point of no return. The downhill drop had begun, and little Chatty Dawson was definitely over a barrel if she wasn't in one. Chatty Dawson began to pray. She got as far as Dear Jesus, when suddenly the front coach door in front of them slammed open in a flurry of surprised exclamations. In the doorway stood a man, holding his gun in his left hand. He whipped out his little leather bag for them to fill. He wore a blue bandana over the lower portion of his face. He wore an old manila riding coat and carried a great .45 Colt revolver in that infamous left hand. A couple of people on that train might not have known who he was, but most knew him and did not waste a lot of time providing him with that which he sought. There could only be one man who boarded trains near sunset and robbed them while they were still in motion. That man was the Sundown Bandit. Chatty's reaction was so violent that her event popped wetly within her like an old mushy balloon. She felt herself go totally limp in the confusion. Chatty would have known the Sundown Bandit without having seen his wanted poster that said, "Reward $500 for the capture or information leading to the capture of the Sundown Bandit." $500 for the hair and hide of this particular creature standing before her. In a day when $250 would have easily bought and paid for a 100-acre farm, the man standing before her was quite expensive indeed. It made her flush just to think about it. "That's the Sundown Bandit," she whispered hoarsely to her aunt. She grabbed the old lady by her flabby arm. Chatty was surprised to feel her aunt had grown so cold. Aunt Grable had turned an ashen pale color. She didn't look good at all. Chatty suddenly realized the danger they were in. They were about to be robbed by a masked gunman. They were about to have a gun pointed in their faces. What would that be like? Was he going to shoot someone today? Would it be one of them? Chatty sat back, making terrified sounds in her throat. Fear gripped her now just as tightly as her contractions had a moment or so before. She thought she might have wet herself. Chatty had never seen people give up so much money so easily. It almost made her sick to watch it happen. The Sundown Bandit was at their seat way before Chatty was ready for him to be there. He walked right up and pointed his huge revolver at the tip of Aunt Grable's nose. She sat staring ahead in defiance. He seemed amused by her reticence. He chuckled patiently and touched the tip of her nose with the barrel and slowly raised it until it was between her eyes. That did the trick. Aunt Grable reached into her bag and without so much as looking tossed her purse into his sack. Chatty's eyes followed the bandit's arm up to his shoulder and then to his covered face. To her shock, she found he was staring right back at her. They made terrific eye contact, and for an instant Chatty remembered her aborted prayer. God certainly did work in mysterious ways, his wonders to behold. He had sent the bandit as her own angel of mercy. Because of the Sundown Bandit's perfectly timed robbery, she had not had to embarrass herself in front of her aunt. She felt grateful for this criminal, despite the fact he was still aiming a gun at her Aunt Grable. But she felt no fear at all, staring into his icy blue eyes. Blue eyes. God help her, the devil's eyes were blue. From deep within her, sweet, syrupy, warm feelings began to pour through her body as she stared at the man. He was so mysterious, so exciting. Few men in the world were worth as much as he was right now, and he would be worth even more after today. His eyes held her for the longest time in their male strength. She felt the earth move underneath her, and not the steady shaking of the train. She blinked and he was gone. She trembled deliciously in her seat. She fell back against the seat, too weak to move. Oh, what had he done to her? She tried to turn her head and see out the window, though she knew it would be too dark to see anything. To her surprise, she could still see a little. They were passing by a horse tied to a tree. She saw it only for an instant, and it went by in a blur, but it was enough to tell her it was the ugliest one animal she had ever seen. It was a roan of some sort, but it was hideously splashed with white streaks and dots all over its head and flank, like it had been whitewashed. It was ugly and big, bigger than the average horse. She turned away as it fell out of sight, and she looked at her aunt. She was crying into a handkerchief. Chatty watched her curiously for some time, and she felt a strange coldness come over her. Chatty tasted a nice bit of revenge in that moment, courtesy of her hero, the Sundown Bandit. Yes, it was true. Little Chatty Dawson was guilty of having fantasies about the Sundown Bandit long before ever meeting him for real. This today was her terrible little dream come true, and he was just as beautiful as she had pictured him. The conductor was summoned, and for the rest of the trip home there was a lot of commotion and crying going on. Chatty was the only one who could sleep after that. She dreamed wonderful dreams about her hero, the Sundown Bandit, and how she was riding on his horse with him over the prairie weeds and cactus at breakneck speeds. She was laughing in the rush of wind and calling out his name as she rode him very close to her body. They went for miles and miles, as hard as they could go, in tandem, faster and faster and faster. At some point, they left the ground. Chatty Dawson shook her head in disbelief. Much later. "Well," repeated her mother, not looking up from her crochet. "Well" was such a cold, hard slap of a word when her mother said it. They were having their little Aunt Grable trip talk today. Chatty had been slandered once again. Her mother looked up at her now and waited for an answer. Chatty swallowed hard and tried to give her one. "Whatever do you mean, Mama?" asked Chatty, stalling for time. It was their little game they played, though Chatty hated playing it. It was their little game of mother-daughter poker. "I think you know," said her mother primly. "Mamma, you will have to tell me. I am not a mind-reader," said Chatty, raising the stakes. Oh, if she was wrong now, it would go twice as hard with her than if she had confessed quickly. Doubled punishment resulted from coy replies, and full well Chatty Dawson knew that. "Aunt Grable tells me that you were less than ladylike on the way home. What about this young lady?" Silence spread between them like spilled honey, as Chatty tried to understand the exact nature of the charge against her. Less than ladylike. What the devil did that mean? The words, "Aunt Grable tells me," always made little Chatty's blood run cold. It was like being hauled up before the head-mistress for a caning. It smarted and stung deeply. Anything she said now would be used against her, and that was the purpose of mother-daughter poker, to make Chatty say more than she had meant to say. Mother settled back now and closed her eyes. Her jury was out, and if Chatty did not speak soon, the verdict would be rendered based upon Aunt Grayble's side alone. Chatty would have to speak, and soon. Chatty decided to resort to theatrics. It had worked before. Maybe now it would buy her some time. "Mama, I love you," blubbered Chatty, trying to cry. She found that she could do it quite nicely now, with the threat of Mother's leather strap hanging behind the door in the big bathroom. By the tone in Mother's voice today, Chatty knew that she was well beyond a simple hairbrush spanking. Her mother seemed to whip her a lot since she had turned 13, and for the most stupid of offenses. She thought her mother was just whipping her to establish authority between the menstrually active females in the house. Perhaps she was, but that did not make it hurt any less. Aunt Grable might get Chatty beaten this very day, unless she could play this down, and fast. "Say on, child," said her mother, in her most judicious of tones. God, Chatty hated this. "I would never do anything to displease you, Mamma," she continued, and then thought to herself, "Bless me, Mother, for I have sinned. It has been about 3 weeks since my last whipping, and during that time I have hated Aunt Grable enough to slit her throat in her sleep. I have, however, enjoyed being away from you and that leather strap for a few minutes, even at the cost of staying with Demura Grable. I hope you reconsider this punishment, though at this moment I have no idea why you are even considering it at all." "I wish you would tell me why Aunt Grable is displeased with me. She told me nothing, I swear it." Chatty clapped her hand over her mouth and trembled. "Oh, way to go, kid," she shivered. Swearing in front of Mother was punishable by death. Her mother looked at her through a half-raised eyelid, as though to log the offense for future consideration. Her mother closed her eyes again and sniffed in agitation. She was still waiting for Chatty to convict herself. Chatty closed her eyes, clearing her throat weakly, and tried again. "Mama, I love you, but I don't know why we have to go through this every time I come back from her place." Her mother opened her eyes and sat up straight. She regarded Chatty evenly, a look of surprise on her face. Chatty swallowed and filled the space in time with more of her argument. "I get tired of this, Mama. I mean it. I'm not a little girl any more, and I don't think I should have to endure this badgering from her. I am old enough to behave, and I do behave. You raised me right, Mama." "Did I, now?" asked her mother icily, and Chatty's blood ran cold. Her mother stared at her as if she had broken some sacred code. She pursed her lips and sighed deeply. Groaned, actually. She was not pleased with Chatty. "Yes, you did," argued Chatty, against her better judgment. Mother took a deep breath and waited. Chatty knew she was trying to draw her out in the open, to make Chatty talk, to fill the empty space in time. As long as there was talk, there could be no stinging smack of the strap. Chatty had learned early to make and keep conversation going as long as possible during these talks. But Chatty was defying her today. There was something deep in Chatty's eyes that her mother could now see. Something that Chatty herself didn't even know was within her. It was the menstrual blood thing. Her daughter was daring her mother to whip her, and Chatty didn't even realize she was doing it. "Aunt Grable tells me that the bandit, Sundown, excited you?" spilled her mother, and for the first time in Chatty's life, Chatty won a hand of mother-daughter poker. But there was no time to gloat. There was barely enough time to prepare a reply. "Yes," said Chatty, trying to throw her mother off guard. "The bandit Sundown did excite me, mother, and he excited everyone else on that train as well. It is his job to excite people, so much that they pay him for his trouble, at gunpoint." "I'll thank you to keep a civil tongue in your head, young lady," said her mother sharply, "or I shall take you into the washroom and give you one." Chatty did not flinch a muscle. She just sat there and met her mother's gaze head on. Her mother could see herself reflected now in her daughter's eyes. "I did nothing wrong, mother," said Chatty, "and if you don't believe that, I suppose it's time for the washing room. But I did not do anything wrong. Aunt Grable is just a miserable, dried-up old maid who hates me and everyone else. She has nothing better to do than to make my life miserable every 6 months, and she's hoping you'll whip me, so I want you to get it over with. Now." Chatty's mother didn't move. She couldn't. Her mouth had fallen open. "I don't care what she says I did, mother. Do you know that? I hate that witch. Yes, let me have my real say, and then you can spank me silly, if you want to do that. I overheard Daddy telling you all about how she's just a mean woman who's never had a man to keep her from sleeping with the devil, whatever that is. Something old maids do, I suppose. But I know what she likes to do. She likes to hurt young girls like me. The new clothes are just a Judas kiss, mother." Her mother gasped at her daughter's newfound swear words. "I was having my period on that train, mother, and the vibrations of the rails as we traveled along did things to me inside. It wasn't my fault, and it wasn't Sundown's fault either. It wasn't anybody's fault, despite what that old crow says. I swear to you, mother, as I sit here, may I be struck completely dead if that isn't the truth." "Chatterley Jean Dawson!" cried her mother. But that was all she could manage. "I don't care, Mama. Strap my butt. Beat me. Go ahead. Bear even. Beat me to death and make her happy. But I am your little girl, Mama, not hers. I will prove it to you. I will never go see her again. I'll run away first." Her mother sat back as though she had been shot. She swallowed and tried to be calm about this, but it was not easy. Her little girl was all grown up now, and if she did try and spank her, odds were that she wouldn't even cry. Once a girl got this rebellious in her heart, nothing much could hurt her any more. "I didn't know," her mother began weakly, "that you were on your cycle, Chatty. I am sorry for that. You should have told Aunt Grable." Chatty did not even answer that. An unseen knowledge passed between them, and they both knew that would have done no good. She smiled, and Chatty looked at her strangely. Mother started crying. Chatty rushed to her side, forgetting her anger now, and her declining fear of the strap. She put her arms gently around her mother's neck and hugged her, as though she had made her cry. Her mother sniffed and smiled at her little girl. "What a fool I am," she whispered softly. "If a handsome outlaw jumps on a train, I suppose that you should feel some of the forbidden fire. It's only natural, and it doesn't make you evil, does it?" "No, Mama, I'm not evil. Really, I'm just your little girl," said Chatty, the tears welling up in her own eyes. Her mother chuckled to herself and sniffed again. "Your aunt has a way with words. She makes everything you do seem like a capital crime. She really is a bent, twisted old woman inside." Her mother stared off into space, adding, "How could I believe that you deliberately did something to shame your family? Chatty, I say that you never have to go back to her again." "Thank you, Mama," said Chatty, "and I'm sorry I tempted you to whip me. I know I deserve it for all I said, if you still want to." "Pshaw, child," said her mother. Listen at you. Listen at you and tell me a girl who feels that way needs spanking. I don't think I'll ever have to whip you again." Chatty smiled and touched her mother's cheek lovingly. There were tears in her mother's eyes. "I love you, Mama," Chatty told her, but she could not answer her back. Her throat was closed with her emotions, too tightly to say a word. The Sundown Bandit ran out of the Capital and County's bank at exactly 4:50 in the evening. Turning to look for followers, no one appeared in the doorway. Perfect. They were too scared to follow. This getaway would be easy. The streets were empty and as dead as the proverbial 4 o'clock. There was no sign of the marshal. This was going to be clean and neat. Sundown hurried to the alley beside the Red Eye Saloon. The great horse stood tied to the stairs, leading up to an apartment over top of the Red Eye. As Sundown reached for the tethered bridle, suddenly gunshots sounded. Sundown winced and cursed. A gunshot over a quiet street in the Old West meant only one thing. A crime had been committed. The Capital and County's bank had just been robbed. Sundown decided in an instant what to do. If they would see a man leaving town on a horse now, they would stop him and find the money in his saddlebag. There was only one thing to do: hide. Sundown saw no one at all as the second volley of shots was fired over the dirt-packed street. Deciding what to do, Sundown ran up the stairs and tried to open the door of the apartment. If the door was locked, it would be no trouble at all to leap up on the rail of the stairs and then jump up onto the flat roof. One way or the other, an escape was going to be made. But the door was not locked. Sundown shot through the door and closed it tightly, leaning back against it. The blue bandana mask was hot as Sundown panted into it, and sweat dripped off the tiny point of the bandana under the chin. The room was dim, but a woman in the tub was quite visible, covered as she was in white soap bubbles. She was pouring champagne over her ample bosom and washing herself enthusiastically. The appearance of Sundown did not dissuade her from this activity. The woman was a prostitute. "Well," she purred, "if this ain't an answer to prayer." Sundown stared at her as she stood up and dropped the empty bottle into her tub. The tub accepted the bottle with a clunk underneath the soapy water, and she leaped out easily, her buttocks dripping great puddles beneath her. She did not even grab for her great, thick, thirsty towel. Instead, she raced towards Sundown and snatched the bag of money away from him, as if it had been a poisonous animal he held. She threw it under her bed, which stood nearby, and she whipped off the coat from the back of the Sundown Bandit expertly, as though the great manila riding coat was just a loose cape. The hat came next, and all of Sundown's mane fell out from under it. She giggled loudly as it fell down onto his shoulders. She fluffed her hands through it, trailing soap bubbles down the front of his shirt as she did so. She teased his hair like a hairdresser would do, enjoying its length and thickness. "You are one beautiful man, Sundown Bandit," she cooed, winking at him and pulling off his mask. "If I had the time, I'd spank you like your mama should have." She kissed him full on the mouth, and then whimpered as she heard a noise out in the hallway. They were coming. Sundown's mind raced with all sorts of terrors. The horse tied downstairs. Of course they would look here. Sundown tried to pull away from her, but she grabbed him close. She was terribly strong for a woman, and she licked his ear with her wet tongue. "I'll save you, my wicked prince," she blew into his ear. "Just do what I make you do." She nuzzled close and smelled the grime and sweat on the outlaw as she said to him, "God, you make me miserably hot." She kissed his throat passionately, and then she threw him onto the bed. Sundown was surprised at the ease with which she had done that. She laughed loudly and pounced on top of the outlaw, her naked, sud-soaped body across the startled figure, a thick knee jammed on either side of his body. "Lay back," she moaned, "and pretend like you're enjoying this." Then she lip-locked him again. Sundown had just had time to catch a breath when the door behind the woman's form on top of him banged open. Sundown went for his gun, but she rammed her hard knee into his hand, almost painfully. "Nuh-uh," she growled playfully into his ear, as the clicking of several Colt .45 pistols behind her made her sit up indignantly. She closed her eyes and spun her head around. "Tom Clary," she said, her huge breasts flopping wetly on her chest. "What in the miserable, wretched Hades do you think you are doing?" The man with the silver star on his leather vest cleared his throat and tried to say something. The men behind him turned away, peeking back again. Her firm, naked derriere was high in the air. There could have been a dead bull under the woman, and they would not have seen it. The sight of her broad behind distracted any thoughts of law enforcement from these weak-minded deputies, who had so often dreamed of this woman in their fantasies at night while making love to their once-a-month wives. They all had sweaty palms now as Tom Clary tried to explain their mission here in her den of iniquity. "Ma'am, there's a horse," he squeaked and cleared his throat. "Outside your residence here. We have cause to believe that the bandit might own it, and if he came this way, why then you're in real danger." She smiled her most wicked smile, and then she playfully flung her hand out at him. There was enough water on her arm to splatter his way, and the great Tom Clary, sheriff of Morgan's Bow, flinched. She giggled and licked her lips. "Shaw, Tommy," she said, "you ain't giving a tinker's righteous about my personal safety. You just wanted to see my beautiful self, didn't you?" She raised her hips off the outlaw, suggestively flashing the three of them. They all turned away as if their eyes had been burned with vitriol. She laughed at their modesty, and then turned to claim her own. "Tom Clary," she said, gravel-like and hateful, "I would suggest you remove yourself from the premises here. Less, of course, you want me to tell your lovely wife all about We were just about to apologize to you, Miss Virginia," said Tom, not wanting her to complete her statement. "Powerful sorry, ma'am," he mumbled.